My parents said they came to see their granddaughter, but within an hour they were talking about matinee showtimes and lunch reservations. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and nervous sweat. I'd scrubbed every surface that morning, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. Mom would still glance at the baseboards and purse her lips. Dad would run a white-gloved finger down the hallway shelf if he thought I wouldn't notice. Old habits, hard to kill. Junie had lined up all her stuffed animals along the window ledge, humming to herself, completely unaware of the performance I was staging. I fixed the couch cushions twice, then a third time. I could already hear Mom saying, "Well, we did raise you to pay attention to detail." When their silver Volvo pulled up, I braced myself. They stepped out dressed like brunch was the main event. Dad in a navy sport coat, Mom in a coral blouse and pearls. They waved, smiling wide, arms already half extended as they approached the porch. "Where's my little angel?" Mom cooed as soon as I opened the door, bypassing me to sweep Junie into a hug. I stood back, forcing a smile. "Good to see you, too." Junie giggled and pointed toward her tea set, which she had placed meticulously on the living room rug. "I saved a seat for Grandma and Grandpa." "Oh, sweetheart," Dad said, chuckling as he lowered himself onto the arm of the couch instead. "We can't stay long. We have a showing at Roxbury in less than an hour." I blinked. "You just got here." Mom was already rummaging through her tote bag. "I brought lemon cookies for her, the good ones from that bakery in Des Moines." Junie clapped her hands, oblivious. I crouched to help her open the box, forcing my voice steady. "She was hoping you'd play tea party." "Oh, darling," Mom said, smoothing Junie's hair. "We promised this movie to ourselves 3 weeks ago. Just a little adult treat, you know. We'll do tea next time." Next time. They always said that. Dad checked his watch. "If we don't leave in 10, we'll miss previews." Junie's face fell as Mom kissed her on the forehead and stood up. "You understand, don't you, Pumpkin? Grown-ups need fun, too." I didn't say anything, not when they hugged her again, not when they walked back out, not even when Mom turned to wave and said, "You're doing such a good job, Nora, really." The screen door clicked shut, and the car engine faded down the block. Junie looked up at me. "They didn't want to stay?" I knelt beside her. "No, baby, they had a movie." She went back to her stuffed animals, quieter this time. I stood there, arms crossed, throat tight. I wanted to scream. Not because I hadn't expected this. I had, but because I'd let myself hope. Again, my body still ached from the procedure last month. I hadn't told them the full story. What was the point? They would have sent flowers and gone golfing. I rubbed my temple and exhaled, turning toward the kitchen to pour some water. That's when I heard the creak from upstairs. Mavis Ellery, my tenant on the upper level, was standing in the doorway with 2 glasses of sweet tea in her hands. Her graying hair was tied back in a loose knot, and she wore one of those faded blouses that always looked like it had been washed 100 times. She didn't say anything right away, just offered 1 glass in my direction. "I can sit with Junie for a bit if you'd like to rest," Mavis said. She didn't smile, but her voice was warm, steady, and real. Mavis didn't ask why my hands were shaking. She just handed me the mug and said, "Peppermint helps." I took it with both hands, careful not to spill. The warmth from the ceramic seeped into my skin, ground in me. I hadn't realized how cold my fingers were until that moment. The silence between us felt oddly safe, not awkward, not pressuring, just there, like an old quilt pulled over your shoulders on a porch swing at dusk. She settled into the armchair by the window, her tea untouched. Junie sat cross-legged on the rug, still surrounded by her animals, one hand twirling the ear of her favorite bunny. Every few minutes she'd glance toward the door, as if expecting it to swing open again, revealing her grandparents smiling, saying it had all been a joke. I knew better. So did Mavis, though she hadn't said a word since offering the tea. Maybe that was why I didn't feel the need to fill the quiet. She wasn't waiting for an explanation. I watched the peppermint steam curl upward. My voice felt stuck in my throat for a while before it finally came out. "I had surgery last month," I said, eyes fixed on the cup. "Complications, I didn't tell them. They wouldn't have come anyway." Mavis didn't react. She just reached for a coaster and set her mug down. "You keeping up okay now?" "Mostly. Junie's been good. She even naps when I need her to, but I let the sentence trail off. She gave a slight nod. It's not always about getting rest. Sometimes it's about not being the only adult in the room. That hit harder than I expected. I glanced at her. Her expression was calm, open, without a trace of pity. There was something in her eyes, an old knowing, like she'd seen this scene play out before. Have you ever had kids? I asked, surprised at myself. Not the way most people mean, she said. But I've taken care of plenty. Used to work part-time at a drop-in daycare before the pandemic. Families who needed a hand, even if just for a few hours. I leaned back into the couch. The cushions gave way too easily. Another reminder I couldn't afford new ones. I guess I've been wary, I said slowly. Let someone else help. Especially with Junie, I keep thinking I should be able to do it all on my own. Mavis didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned her gaze toward Junie, who was now pushing her toy truck back and forth across the carpet with intense focus. I've learned that doing it all is a lie, she said at last. Nobody does it all. Some just hide the cost better than others. A breeze moved the sheer curtain, and I caught a glimpse of the sky turning amber. I felt tired in the way only caregivers do, the kind of tiredness that seeps into your bones and sets up house there. I'm not sure what made you knock on the door earlier, I said, but I'm grateful. She shrugged, reaching into her cardigan pocket and pulling out a tin of mints. I listen for stairs, she said. Footsteps are too heavy or too soft. You get to know the rhythms of a house when you live over it. Junie toddled over with her bunny, holding it up toward Mavis. His name's Mr. Pickle, she declared solemnly. Mavis took the plush toy with care, as though it were a fragile heirloom. Well, Mr. Pickle, she said, it's a pleasure. Junie beamed and climbed into the armchair beside her without asking. Mavis didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her posture so Junie could lean against her side. It took me a moment to notice the change in my own body. The way my shoulders had dropped, my breath deepened. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for something to fall apart. My phone buzzed against the end table. A text from Mom. We're staying overnight in Des Moines. Don't wait up. No question about how Junie was, no check-in on my recovery, just an itinerary update like I was her receptionist. I turned the phone face down. Mavis stood, lifting Junie gently into her arms like she'd done it 1,000 times. She's almost out, she whispered. I nodded, rising slowly. My back ached from hours of pretending I was fine. I can put her down, I said. She's light, Mavis replied. Let me. She disappeared into the bedroom, returning a moment later. She's already snoring. I smiled in spite of myself. She snores like her dad. There was something unreadable in Mavis's face just then. A flicker of memory, maybe, but it passed too fast to name. She moved to the couch, picked up the folded throw blanket, and laid it across the cushions. You sleep out here tonight, she said. I'll take the night shift. I blinked. Mavis, you don't... I know, she interrupted gently, but I want to. She looked me square in the eye. You just rest, Nora. The blanket folded at the foot of Junie's bed wasn't ours, and the note tucked in the corner wasn't signed. I stood in the doorway, blinking sleep from my eyes. Morning sun spilled through the blinds, painting soft stripes across the floor. The air in the house was still, heavy with the quiet that comes only after a night without interruption. It took me a second to realize what felt different. I hadn't gotten up once. No coffin spells, no crying, no pacing the hall. Junie was curled under the pale blue blanket, her thumb tucked under her cheek, breathing slow and deep. Her bunny, Mr. Pickle, was nestled beside her. The blanket was crocheted, fine stitches in a wave pattern. Someone had taken time with it. Time and care. I leaned closer. Tucked just under the edge of the blanket was a folded note card. No envelope. The handwriting was steady and small. For Junie. No name, no flourish. Just that. I stepped back into the hallway, heart pulling in strange directions. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Dark roast, familiar and grounding. I followed it to find Mavis standing at the counter, a dish towel draped over one shoulder, her hair braided and pinned neatly at her nape. She was buttering toast like it was any ordinary Tuesday. You found the blanket, she said, without turning around. It's beautiful, I replied. Did you make it? She nodded. Years ago. Didn't have a little one to give it to then. I hesitated. It's not too much. She looked at me, eyes steady. Nothing's too much for a child who sleeps better wrapped in care. I swallowed, unsure of what to do with the warmth that rose in my chest. Gratitude, yes, but also unease. Not because I didn't trust her. I was starting to more than I wanted to admit, but because of the quiet way she moved, how naturally she stepped into spaces I hadn't realized were empty until she filled them. Junie came toddling in moments later, eyes puffy with sleep, dragging Mr. Pickle behind her. Mavis made toast, I told her, and she left you something special. Junie's face lit up. Was it the blankie? I nodded, watching as she ran over to wrap herself in it like a cape. She said it's magic, I added, though Mavis hadn't said that out loud. Mavis chuckled. Only the good kind. As Junie munched toast, I took a moment to notice the kitchen. A small wooden box sat on the windowsill, one I didn't recognize. I picked it up and opened it gently. Inside was a well-loved children's book with frayed corners, a handful of peppermint candies in wax paper, and a cloth handkerchief embroidered with a single bluebird. I glanced up. Mavis was pouring juice into a tumbler. That's from a house I worked in once, she said. The boy there liked birds. I closed the lid softly. You don't have to keep giving her things. Her hands paused. I know. Then why? She turned to face me. Because someone once gave me more than I thought I deserved, and it changed everything. The words hung there between us. A knock sounded at the door. I peeked through the curtain to see Mr. Denning, Hal, our longtime neighbor, standing on the porch with a basket of peaches in one hand and a paper sack in the other. I opened the door slowly. Morning. He grunted in response and held out the basket. They're ripe. Figured the little one might like 'em. Thank you, I said, taking it. That's kind of you. He narrowed his eyes past me, catching a glimpse of Mavis at the counter. His jaw tightened. She still up there? He asked, voice low. She's in the kitchen, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He shifted on his feet. You don't know her, Nora. Folks like that, they carry stories. I felt something flare up inside me, defensiveness maybe, but I pushed it down. Don't we all? He looked like he wanted to say more, but then thought better of it. With a brief nod, he turned and shuffled down the steps. I closed the door and leaned against it. Mavis hadn't moved. She was drying her hands on the dish towel. You heard that? I asked. She nodded. He doesn't know you. I'm used to that, she said simply. People fill in the blanks with what scares them. Junie ran into the room, her blanket trailing behind like a royal train. She reached for Mavis without hesitation, throwing her arms around her legs. Mavis bent to scoop her up, and Junie nestled into her shoulder like she belonged there. I stood across the room watching them, something shifting inside me. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't even curiosity. It was recognition. But what if I do know her? Just not yet. I didn't expect to find my husband's handwriting again, not in a stranger's room upstairs. But there it was, slanted just slightly to the right, as if the pen had been in a hurry, but the hand behind it never was. It sat on the corner of a ledger beneath a small ceramic dish of paper clips. I froze. The breath in my throat caught like a thread on a splinter. Mavis had invited me upstairs after dinner, saying she had an extra basket of sewing supplies that might help mend Junie's frayed summer dress. It was the kind of offer you didn't refuse, not out of politeness, but because something in her tone said it mattered to her that you came. Her upstairs room was clean, but lived in, with worn rugs and floral curtains that fluttered gently in the open window. The ceiling sloped low in one corner, where an old writing desk sat under a reading lamp, books stacked in leaning towers, a pair of reading glasses resting atop a folded newspaper, and that ledger. She saw me staring before I could say anything. You recognize the handwriting, she said, not as a question. I nodded slowly. It's his. I thought so, she said, and crossed the room. She lifted the dish, picked up the ledger, and gently opened it to the first page. I didn't breathe. There was a name typed across the top of the form, Ellery Mavis. Underneath it, a list of program notes and check boxes, signed off by Jonathan Whitmore, technical instructor. She turned the page. There was a small photograph, paper clipped to the corner. It showed a young woman, tight braid, no smile, standing in front of a whiteboard. Mavis. Decades younger, but unmistakable. I was 21, she said. On my third group home, angry at everything, especially people who told me what I couldn't be. She sat down in the chair by the window, resting the book on her lap. Jonathan ran workshops at a local nonprofit, carpentry, basic web design, small business skills. Said people needed more than just advice, they needed tools. I sat across from her, careful not to speak too soon. I needed to hear it all. I almost skipped that day, she said. But he came in with this broken chair and told us he needed help fixing it. And something about the way he asked, like it wasn't a trick, made me stay. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him. Mavis looked down at the photograph. He didn't talk much about himself, but he paid attention. He watched the way people leaned, the way they hid things. He told me once that people carry stories like old suitcases, heavy, awkward, and full of things they don't really need anymore. She paused, fingers brushing the edge of the page. One day, I got an email. A scholarship application had been submitted in my name. I thought it was spam, but it wasn't. Someone had built a whole online portfolio, photos, testimonials, a little bio, all written like I mattered. I felt my throat tighten. He never told me he'd done it, she said, but I found out later from the director it was him. I reached for the book, running my hand over the rough paper. He used to stay up late building sites for nonprofits, I whispered, said the world needed quieter heroes. We sat there for a long moment, the silence soft rather than heavy. Mavis reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. He left something, she said. I don't think he ever meant it to be found, but I did. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter in Jonathan's handwriting, dated 2 years before his death. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a journal-like note. If anything ever happens to me, I hope someone will be there for them the way I tried to be for others. I didn't cry, not then. But something inside me eased, like a knot coming loose after years of pulling tight. Mavis stood and returned the ledger to its place. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just walked to the small bookshelf and selected a volume, holding it out. Something to read tonight, she said. It's not about fixing things, just understanding them. I took the book, still clutching the letter in my other hand. I never got to thank him, Mavis said, voice thick, but I can still honor what he gave me. They showed up 2 days later, arms full of guilt and excuses. Dad was holding a stuffed koala wearing a little backpack that read Cedar Falls Zoo. Mom had a tote bag swinging from her elbow, organic juice boxes, some plastic-wrapped cookies, a new picture book with an untouched spine. Junie ran to the door when she heard the knock, but she didn't open it. She turned to me instead, eyes wide. They came back. I opened the door with a measured breath. The sunlight made them both squint. Look who's here, Dad boomed, trying too hard. We just couldn't stay away from our favorite girl, Mom added, her smile tight as a headband. I stepped aside, letting Junie peek out. Hi, sweetie, Mom said, crouching just enough to look less imposing. We were thinking, maybe a zoo trip. Just us. We got your favorite, lemon shortbread. Junie reached for the cookies, then looked at me for approval. I think we need to slow down, I said gently. Why don't we sit out back for a bit? Their smiles faltered, but they nodded. We moved to the backyard, the three of us settling onto the weather-worn bench beneath the maple. Junie sat on the steps, flipping through her new book. I don't understand, Mom began, once Junie was distracted. We're just trying to spend time with her. You left her, I said, keeping my voice low. You said you came to see her, and then you left her alone so you could catch a matinee. Dad frowned. You were here, you always are. I turned toward him slowly. You didn't even ask if I was okay. Mom looked down. We thought you were just being dramatic. You didn't say anything about being sick. I laughed softly. You didn't ask. The silence that followed was brittle. We were trying to give you space, Dad said. You've been so distant. I nodded. That's one way to describe being abandoned. They shifted uncomfortably. For once, no rehearsed lines, no deflections, just silence. "We thought you'd appreciate a break," Mom tried again. "A break?" I looked at her. "From what? Being a mother? Being your daughter? You walked out, left her with someone you don't even know." Dad glanced toward the house. "Is she still staying upstairs?" "Mavis?" I said. "Yes, she's helped more in 2 weeks than either of you have in years." They both looked surprised. Dad shook his head. "I don't know, Nora. Letting a stranger that close, that's not safe." I bit down on my reply, then said quietly, "You don't get to lecture me about safety. You left your granddaughter to go have brunch." Mom's voice quivered. "You're making this out to be cruel, and it wasn't." "Then what was it?" I asked. "Neglect by accident?" Dad's jaw tightened. "You're not being fair." I let out a slow breath. "You're right. I haven't been fair. I've been covering for you, pretending your version of love was enough, but it's not." Junie ran over with her book. "Grandma, read." Mom blinked fast, clearly fighting tears. "Not today, honey." Junie pouted, clutching the book to her chest. Dad stood. "We'll come back another time, when you're in a better place." I stood too. "This is my better place, right here, right now, because I'm no longer trying to prove myself to people who only show up when it's convenient." He narrowed his eyes, but I didn't flinch. "You left her with someone you barely acknowledged," I said, voice steady. "You don't get to wear the loving grandparents badge just because you showed up in a Volvo with cookies." He looked like he might argue, but Mom touched his arm. "We should go," she said quietly. They turned without another word. From the window, I saw Mavis standing just behind the curtain, watching. She stepped out as I came back in, her eyes meeting mine. "You said what he would have said." The pie was still warm, and so was the note tucked under the foil. I found it on the porch just after sunset, the scent of cinnamon and roasted pecans rising as I lifted the cover. The note was folded once, written in shaky but deliberate print. "Still watching. You're doing just fine. HD." I looked out past the railing. Hal's porch light was on across the street, his silhouette just visible in his rocker. The basset hound curled at his feet. I raised the pie in a quiet thank you, and he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before turning his gaze back to the twilight. Inside, Junie was stacking her colored blocks with careful concentration, and Mavis was tidying up the dinner dishes, humming something old and low. I carried the pie to the kitchen and set it down on the counter between us. "From Hal," I said. "Pecan." Mavis smiled faintly. "He's coming around." "Slowly," I replied. She rinsed a plate and passed it to me to dry. The rhythm was easy now, familiar. The phone buzzed once, and I glanced at the screen. A message from Hannah. "They've been quieter since Tuesday. No more speeches, just sitting in the garden. I think they're finally starting to hear themselves." I typed a quick reply. "Let them. I've moved on." As I set the phone aside, Mavis placed a small wooden box on the counter, the same one from the upstairs room, now neatly closed. "I've cleared out the last of my things," she said. "You don't need a tenant anymore." My stomach twisted. "Mavis," she raised her hand gently. "You need a partner, Nora, someone who stays because they choose to, not because they owe you rent." I looked at her for a long moment, then I smiled. "So you're saying we're co-captains now?" She chuckled. "I prefer co-pilots. Captains tend to bark orders." We laughed, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel borrowed or temporary. Junie came running into the kitchen with one of her drawings, a family of stick figures, holding hands beneath a smiling sun. "This one's you," she said, pointing to a figure with a long braid. "And this is me, and that's Mavis." Mavis knelt to look. "That's the best braid I've ever seen." Junie grinned proudly. I reached for the fridge magnets. "Let's make this official," I said, pinning it between a calendar and a postcard from years ago. The front door creaked open with the breeze, and I stepped out to turn on the porch light. The night air was cool, the kind that carries memory in its folds. I thought of Jonathan, of all the nights he stood on that same porch switching the light on before coming in just in case someone needed to find their way home. I turned back to see Mavis and Junie on the couch, flipping through a storybook. The lamp cast a soft glow around them, and the house, This patched together, gently held together life felt whole. And this time, I wasn't alone anymore. Some of the kindest gestures come without fanfare, like a blanket folded at the edge of a child's bed, or a pie left on the porch with a simple note. We often search for love in grand declarations, forgetting that real care lives in the quiet corners, offered without condition or expectation. Kindness has a way of circling back even years later when the world least expects it. So perhaps today, hold the door a little longer or listen a little deeper, because you never know whose burden you might be helping carry. And maybe, like a porch light left on at dusk, your small act might just lead someone home.